Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Smaulgld Subscribers Sound Off series. Today we have the distinct honor of having Vijay Mahrra coming to us from England. Vijay is a semi-retired web developer who has vast life experience and also a firm grip on economics, which he gained not only through reading and understanding, but by traveling the world on a couple of bike tours. So we're going to get into that. Vijay, welcome to the Smaulgld Subscriber Sound Off show. How long have you been a Smaulgld subscriber?
I've been following you since probably about a year or so. Initially, it was through Twitter. I came across your tweets, and they're always very informative and interesting. And from there, I started to watch the videos, and I thought out of the spectrum from both extremes of being anti-gold and being like completely gold's gonna fly to the moon, you're firmly in the middle, and I quite like that.
I like being normal. Thanks very much for being a subscriber and following, for all your input over the year now. Give us some background. That introduction probably didn't do you justice on your professional background, and then maybe you can get into your views on gold. Now you're in England, so we're going to talk about Brexit and so on, but let's hold off on that for a minute and the upcoming elections. Tell me about your web developer career, and then how that kind of morphed into you being kind of an international man of mystery, and how you learned about economics and gold and silver that way.
Okay, sure. So if you go back 20 years, that's more or less when I started my career in web development. So that was before it kind of took off, at least in the UK, 96, 97. And I was a student then, and I was on my sandwich year, we call it here, where you take a university course for 4 years and 1 year you work in industry. So I managed to blag a job at an internet service provider. That was called EasyNet back in the day. They're still around. And I got a job as the kind of student person there. So it wasn't quite making cups of tea and stuff, but it was kind of to do a lot of different things. So I learned all about the web and the internet and registering domains and creating web space and making websites right from the very early days before you had your Googles, and Netscape was dominant and Microsoft was just about playing catch up. So starting from those very early days, we used to worry if the web would take off, and here we are. So now, yeah, I've been through a phase where I've spent the last few years chilling out, cycling around a little bit. I've worked 1 year in the last 3 years since I left the last place I was living and working in, which was Sweden. And since I've had a lot of free time, this has enabled me to look into a lot of things, study a lot of things, and that's how I kind of got more interested in the whole gold and silver and economic issues.
Oh, so can you give us, Vijay, you were in England at the time during the Brexit vote, and what was the mood? And you're living up in the north.
I'm in the West Midlands of England, near to Birmingham City, which is the second biggest city in the UK.
And that area was predominantly for Brexit?
Birmingham narrowly voted for Brexit. The town where I am is Wolverhampton, and there were more people in my local area, especially, that were voting for Brexit. Maybe it was in our area where we live here about 65% maybe. And an interesting thing is a lot of the news media portrayed Brexit in very black and white terms. For example, the common meme after the vote was everyone is racist and anti-immigrant in the UK, which is very untrue. There's a lot of reasons why people voted for Brexit. For me personally, it was I'd studied a lot of finance and economics in recent years, as I mentioned, and I came across the work of Professor Richard Werner, who you may have heard of.
Yes, he's on Twitter.
Yeah, he was a journalist, a financial journalist, and he'd studied professionally, and he was in Japan in the 80s and 90s, and he made certain papers which revealed for the first time how the banking and money creation and credit creation works, and he's actually released papers showing how credit boom and bust cycles are created, and it was very eye-opening to read his papers, and he is on Twitter, so I do recommend following Professor Werner. He made a documentary called Princes of the Yen, which is on YouTube. If you Google it, find it on YouTube. And that explains how Japan became the powerhouse economy that it was after the Second World War. So he published an article in the run-up to Brexit on his website about the European Union, and he made the economic arguments for Brexit, and he made a very strong case as to what would happen if Brexit was to occur, and he's been proven right. So I read his article, and that was very influential for me as well in the run-up. Initially, I was dithering because I'm an EU citizen. So having been born and brought up here in the UK, I'd taken advantage of that. I was part of the so-called middle-class elite, you could call it, who can move around from one country to another because we're educated, we've got skills. So I lived in Sweden, Spain, Ireland, before coming back here. So I'd kind of fit the kind of mold of many of the friends that I had, say, on social media, Facebook at the time. I'm not on there anymore, but they were all very, very angry and very upset about Brexit. But I was quite pleased about it because I could see how it had affected my local community here.
Well, what's interesting is there are benefits to, and I was also able to travel myself, and I am in favor of the ability of people to move around, but I think you take that and you say that's a good thing, and we don't want to lose that by leaving the EU, but you don't necessarily need to lose that. I mean, you don't have to have all European rules just so that people from England can go live and work in Spain. I mean, you can work those arrangements out, because I was a US citizen and I traveled and worked in some of the places you did abroad. And the United States, last I checked, isn't part of the EU. So I don't think it's that necessary. Now, let's get back to Brexit. When the vote came out, from what we read here in the States, was that gold sales took off. There was some type of mania, people lining up to buy gold and silver in London and other places. And now they're saying the same thing is happening again. What was actually happening in your part of the world, in England? Do people even think or care about precious metals there?
On the whole, most people around here, they just think it's like they say in the financial media, it's an ancient relic. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was different in that my background, having come from an Indian family. As you know, Indians love gold. I never actually liked gold. Most of my life, I've just been like, I'm not really interested in gold. Like, it's quite common to give jewelry as gifts and stuff. And I've been given gold chain when I was 16 years old by my grandmother, and gold ring another time. And I was just like, what am I going to do with this? I'm not going to wear this. Someone's going to rob me for it. What's the point? So I never really had any interest in gold, but and I could never understand this obsession with gold. But it was luckily in the last few years, I've seen how important gold is and has been in the financial system.
Well, now the Indian obsession with gold, if you could probably speak very well to this culturally, that's not based on finance, or is it?
It's considered auspicious to give gold, and people they use it as family heirlooms, I guess, to pass on wealth. And as an emergency way to get money if you need money in an emergency. So I guess that's why. But generally, people don't. Most people that I know that are from this similar background, they don't go running out to sell their gold. They normally just keep it within the family and pass it on. Like many old Indian women here, even they'll be walking down the street with 10 gold bangles on or something ridiculous worth. But then there was a spate of robberies in recent years, and it's not so common. But you still see many people that do actually wear their gold as well around here.
I see. Now, a lot of Americans, they have this set view that silver is basically a gold substitute. Now, I have Indian friends, and not one of them has ever said that silver takes the place of gold. What's the view of your view and then of your countrymen in of silver vis-a-vis gold? Are the two considered on the same level, or is it a poor man's gold, or what is silver?
Um, Most people have no interest at all in silver, I would say, here. Within Indian families, nobody really thinks about silver very much or discusses it. It's just it's if you've got something that's jewelry and you don't want gold, then you might buy some jewelry made of silver. But as in terms of getting coins or bars or anything like that, that doesn't happen. Whereas people that are of an Indian background here will get a safe, they will get coins, they will get bars and stuff. That still happens here.
In silver or gold?
In gold, but not really in silver.
Right, and I can hear some of the listeners saying that's not true. Silver is like the biggest thing ever in India, and I happen to know that it's not. But you can't convince a silver bug that silver is not the gift of God to the world, and therefore is destined to skyrocket, and the gold silver ratio is going to come down to 1 to 1. It's more valuable than gold, it's more useful than gold. What's your view on the kind of hysteria of a lot of the people predicting for the last, I'd say, more than half a decade, silver to the moon, silver to skyrocketing crowd?
All I can say really is that silver is cheap. That's what it comes down to. Silver is cheap. Yeah. And if something's cheap, then people don't look at it as being worth very much because it is cheap. So it's like, why would I have that? It's cheap. Anyone can get hold of that. It's not worth anything. I might as well collect brass or copper or something.
Very useful metals too. You can make an argument that copper is very, very useful too, and therefore, why isn't copper $300, $500 a pound?
Yeah, actually, this is an interesting point, going back to the Brexit thing, because in the area that I'm living in, if I may digress, many people came here from Eastern Europe, from countries like Bulgaria and Romania. They've settled in this area, and if you leave anything outside your house which is metal, which has got metal in it, it's gone. If I was to go outside my house here and put something there, television, cable, coax cable, anything outside the house, I can guarantee you within half an hour it'll be gone, because people will just go up and down the street and they'll reclaim it to get the copper value or the that's probably got more value than silver to the people around here.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that the silver crowd online is so immersed in the concept of silver being this indispensable metal that has to go higher. I'm not knocking silver. I get accused of knocking silver. What I'm doing is actually trying to get across the point. There's a reason the gold-silver ratio is as high as it is, and why it really hasn't moved over the last 5 years. But in any event, let's move now to, we're going to tap into your expertise and contacts in India. For our listeners who don't know, late last November, the Prime Minister of India decided, well, I don't know if he decided, but he announced that it would be a good idea to demonetize the existing rupee notes. What were they, the 5 and 20 or the 10 and the 20?
I think it was the 500 and
I'm sorry, the
1,000.
Yeah, and they
rupee notes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. And they represented about 85-90% of the currency in circulation. And he thought, if we can get them to turn them in, and for new notes, we're going to be able to flush out a lot of dark money. Because if people can't explain where they got the cash, well, in any event, it became kind of an invitation for some people during those 48 hours that they had to turn the notes in or they would become worthless. It became an invitation to go out and try to buy gold with it. Did you have any contacts in India and who lived through that demonetization? If so, can you share that with us, Vijay?
My mother's got some a brother and sister and their families that still live in New Delhi. Most of them have actually emigrated to the States and Canada, Australia, and here. But anyway, were around at the time, and as soon as I found out about what was going on, because I saw the news breaking on Twitter, and I said, this is going to be big. And I told my mother, I said, do you have any like rupees lying around, because it's not going to be worth very much soon. And we had a friend of the family here who happened to be traveling to India soon, so we just pooled our rupees and notes and gave them to him to go to India and change them.
And there was no way, if you lived in India, I'm sure there are plenty of Indians in England,
yeah.
in London, and throughout the world. Were there any accommodations made for those people who had rupees abroad to turn them in anywhere other than in India?
No, not that I know of. Although it would make sense that people would maybe say, you know, we'll take your rupees here and stuff and give you something, because I think the deadline may have just passed or is about to pass in India, that you can take the old notes in if you're a non-resident Indian, they call it, if you're a foreign Indian person, to exchange them for the new notes. So that, I think that might still be going on, yeah, but the deadline was due to run out soon.
Well, here's an interesting thing that I saw. Same with the American view on silver. When I heard about this, I was outraged. I said, this is just the most heavy-handed thing a government can do to actually call in its currency. It highlights to me the value of having something like even Bitcoin or gold, or something that they can't just call on you and say it's not worth anything anymore. And I just thought that the universal reaction in India would be this is outrageous and we're not going to put up with it. And then I started to hear that a lot of Indians were in favor of that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, certainly. So, like I said, I have an uncle and aunt in New Delhi. That's where they live. And when this whole thing kicked off, and they were very calm about it. Well, my uncle happens to work in a bank anyway.
Okay.
So he was sorted. But my aunt, she was retired. And she said, oh yeah, we got tons of money, but lying around at home in our safe and everything, but we'll just wait till everything calms down, and then we'll go down to the bank and we'll change our money later on. Yeah, we're in no rush. We'll be fine. So in India, the middle class is 300 million people, and if you're middle class in India, you're quite well off. You've got a good standard of living, possibly a servant living in house. You've got your wealth in cash lying around and stuff, and you'll be fine. People were fine that were middle class. It was the poorer people that had probably more issues. The 600 million people that are extremely poor. I don't know how much they live on, but $1 a day kind of like lifestyle and very little savings, and those are the people that really suffered from the demonetization, because a lot of people that are middle class in India, and they have bank accounts as well, and they do use their bank accounts, and they do use their cards and things, even though much of the economy is cash based. The cash is mainly used for daily shopping, buying vegetables and fruits from the local market sellers and things like that.
But wasn't it difficult? I mean, even if you're middle class and you have means, if you don't have the means to transact, what did people do in areas where there weren't bank accounts and the cash wasn't available? I mean, there must have been some slowing or just a complete shutdown of certain types of commerce.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of reports that were coming out. Like there was that gentleman on the Acting Man website who was reporting live about what was happening. But as far as my own family was concerned, anyway, they were just quite relaxed and calm about it, and it's part of the Indian psyche as well, I suppose, that in general people defer to authority. They're very deferent to authority. They culturally, you respect people that are older, no matter if you know them well or not. So people generally are very kind of respectful of the government. They believe the things the government tells them. people say it's all about money laundering and other things, and so people just say, okay, you know, and this is a good thing, and we don't like this nasty neighbor across the border, Pakistan, who's sending us terrorists and all this kind of thing. So yes, let's do this. They're counterfeiting our currency. We can't let this go on. We need to do this for our country. So it's a kind of patriotic thing to do in a way. And people that I know here that are from a similar generation, like 50 years old, 60 years old, they are like many of the middle class in India. They follow the mainstream media, Indian news channels, which spin the official pro-government line, and they just buy into it and say this is a good thing. And one of the things somebody told me who recently visited, who's Indian, told me, how many terrorist attacks have there been in India since the demonetization? He said, there hasn't been any terrorist. I don't know if this is true or not, but as far as I know, there hasn't been any terrorist attacks. And he goes, this is because they were getting funding from Pakistani infiltration, sending forged money and all this kind of thing.
Oh, so basically, it's very important to understand that how we view the world isn't necessarily how others view it. And I know it sounds like kindergarten, but we have to always remember that, because my initial reaction was that what Modi was doing was political suicide. It was crazy. As it turns out, he had rallied the people behind him. But here's another one that I want to ask you about in India. Now, we know you mentioned that giving gold is an auspicious thing. And one of the problems with gold for the Indian government is that it creates a trade imbalance, because India has no natural gold mines that they actually, maybe they have it, but they haven't been operating gold mines since the end of World War II, and there's basically no domestic gold mining supply. So to satisfy Indians' desire for physical gold, they have to import it. Well, that messes up with the trade balance for India. So for that reason, one of the reasons, India tries to curb gold imports, has tried to wean its citizens off physical gold, and they came up with this concept a couple of years ago, the India rupee bond, where you turn your gold into the government, they would give you these certificates, and they would pay you interest on your gold. Now you mentioned that a lot of Indians, they'll be very deferential to their government, and is the case with demonetization of gold. However, they do not seem to be buying into this rupee bond, and I see the Indian media, Economic Times of India and so on, they are pushing this. They're trying to like say you don't need to have gold, barbarous relic, whatever it is. But why do you think Indians are not like taking we must do what our government tells us? Because they're not telling they have to, they're telling them it's a good thing for them. But why aren't they buying into the Indian rupee gold bond offer?
Because most Indian people do know that paper money is worthless. That's why they get the gold in the first place.
Right.
So in their view, my money's worthless. So, you know, a lot of Indian people, they will go to what's called the black money market, the black market. They will change their Indian currency for foreign currency. It's been going on for decades. You can get a much better rate. And that's the same the world around. People who don't have a strong currency will always get the US dollar or the British pound or euros now. So people know their money isn't going to be very useful over the long term. They know it depreciates through inflation and so on. So if they've got gold, they know I'm safe with my gold.
Right, but
so why would I give it? Why would I give it to anyone? Why would I trust anyone with it?
Well, the reason you
this
would.
Is my gold.
The reason you would, though, it's kind of, I guess it's I wouldn't say schizophrenia, but I guess that the Indian mentality is you support your government when it's convenient. You know, in the demonetization where it's not going to impact you, but when they want your gold, well, maybe that's a different story.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally. That's how it is, because people know that gold is something that's really valuable. Money, like most of the money in India. I recently read a very interesting book by a man by the name, I think his surname is Bender. He made a book called The Money Makers. You can find it on Amazon. It's one of the few books about how cash and currency is actually printed and created, banknotes and so on. And he had some interesting comments about how the Indian money printing presses were set up, and that in India it's one of the few countries in the world where there's an actual industry where people are paid to sew and stitch bad notes up together because the currencies gets passed around so much before it's replaced. So a lot of the notes are worn and tatty anyway. So people just look at it as it's just a bit of paper.
Yeah, well, that is what it is. So, all right, let's move away from India and let's go on a bit of a cycling tour. And you can weave into that cycling tour you had with your work experience and kind of what you saw. I think you were in some key places during some key times during the economic crisis.
Yeah, well, I got into cycling living in Sweden. I lived in Sweden between 2011 and 2014. And I bicycled back because it's a very good country, great for cycling, good infrastructure and so on. So I bicycled back to the UK to see if I could do a bicycle tour and if I could make it. And I took a couple of ferries to Denmark, one to Denmark, cycled across Denmark, so I caught another ferry to the UK and managed to get home in the space of 4 or 5 days after leaving Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden where I was living. So I thought, okay, I can do the cycling thing. So I did another tour in Spain where I'd also lived. I'd lived there for 5 years. And then flew to Italy from Spain and did a tour there, catching up with friends and family. And then I did a big tour. I bicycled to Buenos Aires in Argentina, and I took my bike. I went with a friend who also was interested in bicycle touring, and we spent some time in Buenos Aires, and we encountered the black market money changers of Buenos Aires. And we saw how the economy was affected because if you can recall, in the early 2000s, the Argentine economy collapsed. They defaulted on their debt, and they'd imposed restrictions on the import and export of goods and money and so on. So during this trip, it was about 2 months cycling through Argentina and Chile. We went from Buenos Aires to the tip of South America and went up on our tour. And I've sent a link to you, Lewis, so you can put that up if people are interested in the whole bicycle touring aspect of things. But anyway, in Buenos Aires, you had these black market money changers, and they were set up like a traditional. It looked like from the outside, like it would be a conventional bank or something, but it was actually illegal because money changing was officially like restricted and controlled. But you could go in there, you could get a better rate than you could from the official changes. The official rate when I went there was about 10 Argentine pesos to the dollar. But I could get 13.5 if I went to an illegal changer. So instantly, the money was worth more to change illegally. So that was the only option that I had, really, because and because of what was going on there, people were very cash based in Argentina. Complete change from Sweden, where I was living before, where it's become virtually cashless, which you can talk about later, probably. Went there, changed the money, and I met somebody while I was in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, who was an American guy, and he told me that what he was doing, he was studying there with his girlfriend. They were both American citizens. What they would do was they would go to the US and they would fly back with about 6 or 7 iPhones, and then they would sell them for double the price, dollar price in Argentina to get their money. So all through this trip, I could see how people were desperate for foreign currency, and they knew that their currency was worthless because the official interest rate was about 15% or something inflation rate, but the unofficial inflation rate was 30%. So people couldn't wait to get rid of their pesos for anything else. So everywhere you went in Argentina, there'd be, if they saw that you were foreign or you looked foreign, they would be asking you, cambio, you change, would you like to exchange some money? And I met an old pensioner who helped fix my bike along this trip, and had a really long chat with him, and he told me about a lot of the economic issues Argentina had, and he said the main issue that they were lying about the inflation was just to keep the increases in pensions and welfare and so on down.
Right, exactly. You know, I went to Argentina probably 10 years before you did, and I had been used to traveling in Europe, and one of the first things I used to do, this was before the euro, was exchange my dollars for local currency. So I did the same when I got to Argentina. I got to the hotel, and I was going to pay in cash for the hotel, and he could tell I was a foreigner because I was speaking my halting Spanish. And I went to give him the pesos. He's going, what are you doing? Don't you have dollars? And I'm like, no. Yeah, of course I do, but this is Argentina. Here's the pesos. He goes, I don't want those. And so I had to give him dollars. And then I realized I had a hard time using the pesos because in the bars and cafes, they understood that I was foreign. They figured, let's see the good stuff. I don't. Yeah, I know you don't just have pesos. So I managed to get rid of them all. I didn't change all my money at the time, but that would have been a big mistake. So you told me about Sweden. Now you were in Sweden recently enough to know about the cashless society. Well, how is that when you're actually there?
Well, coming from the UK is quite similar to the US in a lot of ways when it comes to, you know, people still like to pay in cash here quite a lot, although the USA is probably more cash-based than the UK. Ah. Going to Sweden, it was a complete change because everywhere I went in Sweden, people would pay with their cards everywhere. They pay with a debit card. If you went to a newsagent to buy a cup of coffee and a newspaper or something, you would pay maybe the equivalent of $1 or $2. You'd buy it with your card, which a lot of the time doesn't make sense because of the bank charges. Right. But I guess in Sweden they don't have so high bank charges, or they're waived or minimized, because in the UK, in a lot of places, you can still go in shops here and they say, you know, if you're spending £2 or £3, or if you spend under £5, there will be a charge of 20 pence added on because if you pay with a card. So right. It discourages people from using cards to pay for small amounts. But in Sweden, it was totally different. They said, oh, you know, everywhere you go, you pay with card. Why wouldn't you pay with a card? It's convenient. You're safe. You won't get robbed. And so on. It was a complete change, and every time someone visited me out there, they were completely shocked and surprised as well. I said, oh, I changed my money in the airport, and I got these Swedish krona and stuff, and it was very odd. But there was one place I knew in the town I was living in, the city of Gothenburg of Sweden, second largest city in Sweden on the west coast, where there was a bar, and they only took cash, which was unusual. And that was because everywhere else people just took cash or paid by card.
And do I heard a rumor that the beggars take plastic too in Sweden. Is that correct?
I've heard of it, but I never saw it while I was there. But I've heard that it is beginning. I know that the sellers of the Big Issue magazine had card readers. For those who don't know, the Big Issues, it's a newspaper that homeless people sell to earn a bit of money.
Yeah, it's
very common in London.
Yep, they still have that. They had that when I was there. In fact, Oasis mentions that in one of their songs, selling the Big Issue. That's one of those cultural things. We don't have the Big Issue in the United States. I don't think we have anything similar to that. Also, you have in England, before we wrap up, I saw something the other day, another cultural thing. I think the tabloids, they say, still have, you know, the print papers. I guess they're still out there as kind of billboards on the street, and they still have an outsized influence on, even though we're in the digital, where we receive our news digitally. Is that true? That those tabloids are still powerful?
Yeah, many people still read newspapers here. Circulations are falling as they are everywhere else. But what's become quite common here is newspapers have cut their prices, thinned out, changed the sizes. They've been given away free more and more. So, for example, a really good example is, especially with the upcoming election next month, is George Osborne, the former Chancellor, Finance Minister here. He's the editor of he's been made the editor of a newspaper called I think it's the London Evening Standard, even though he has no background in editing, and he's the editor for this newspaper amongst many other gravy train jobs he's picked up since he left his post last year. and he's peddling a free newspaper, and he's the editor of it, and he's the ruling party. He's a ruling party serving minister.
I say sorry.
So
well, before we
so
wrap
people
up,
get influenced.
yes. So before we wrap up, give us tell us what's going on with the elections. Many people in America aren't following the British elections, and tell us what's going on, who's expected to win, and what the implications will be.
Okay, this is all looking at what's going on. You gotta think about what's being reported, much in the same way as the U.S. presidential election and Brexit last year, because last year Brexit was not going to happen, no matter what you read, everything in the run up, the polls and so on. Last year with Donald Trump, I followed that very closely, by the way, and I managed to make a bit of money on that because I was following people like you and other alternative sources, and what I was seeing and what was reported were two different things. So even for someone from the UK, I could see what was going on. So coming down to where we are here now with this election just a mere few weeks away, the Conservative Party, who's ruling, they are predicted to win hugely. They are predicted to be a good 10-15%, getting a good 10-15% more of the vote than the Labour Party. So if you were to believe the polls, the Conservatives are going to wipe the floor with Labour. Labour Party, who's the main opposition party, led by the socialist Jeremy Corbyn, is going to completely collapse. That's the narrative that's being built up and is going along. But looking around at what's been going on, talking to people about things anecdotally, much in the same way as Brexit, many people I knew were pro-Brexit. I knew very few people in the UK that were not for Brexit. Although most of the people that I knew that were of my education level and that I'd worked with were anti-Brexit. The word on the street, the feeling on the ground was that it was going to happen. With Jeremy Corbyn, it's a similar feeling I'm getting at the moment, and the Labour Party, because looking at, I haven't been following the news very closely because I know that a lot of it is lies from the last years of reporters in Brexit and Donald Trump and everything else. But they show wherever Jeremy Corbyn goes, the Labour Party leader, there are huge crowds. It's kind of like Trump mania. Everywhere he's going, there are huge crowds. He's offering a socialist alternative, but it's a very real alternative to what's been going on for the last several years of Conservative leadership, where we've had a lot of spending cuts, a lot of services slashed, a lot of people that are the poorest in society being made worse off through cuts to essential services, pensioners, people that rely on the health service here, which is free at the point of use. So he's promising more money for hospitals, more money for teachers, free school meals again. There used to be free school meals for all children that were under a certain age, and he's promising that. He's promising a national and regional investment funds to stimulate business, kind of similar to what Germany does. So he's offering an alternative socialist alternative to what the establishment ruling party is offering.
And when is that election, Vijay?
I think it's June the 11th. I don't know the exact date, but it's next month. It's a few weeks away.
And has this had any impact on gold or silver buying, or is this just I get if Jeremy Corbyn were to win, would that reflect some type of seismic change in British politics that would create uncertainty, or would that just be you have a different party in?
I would imagine that it would affect the pound negatively. The pound would fall, I would imagine. I would imagine gold would go up, because it's all about perception with politics.
Would it change Brexit, though? Would it change the course of Brexit? Or is that already...
It definitely would. I've read both the manifestos of both the parties recently, and the Labour manifesto is very pro-European, I would say. They say we will continue with taking the UK out of the EU, but we will maintain try to maintain the free trade agreements and keep things open and have free movement where possible. And it's kind of giving this line that would appease people that voted to remain in the EU. The whole section in the manifesto is downloadable from the website if you really want to look at the details. Is saying that we will be not doing any kind of hard Brexit where we say, okay, no deal, we're done, we'll go through the WTO and so on, which is what the Conservative Party is saying.
Easier said than done. So I suppose that would create some uncertainty. Well, you know what? We're about out of time now, Vijay, but we will check back with you after the election to see who wins and who doesn't. I want to thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. It's been great chatting with you. Look forward to having another chat again.
Excellent.